all the Epstein files, anything relating to them held by the Department of Justice and the FBI, were due to be released today. And now it looks like they're not going to be. And that is actually blatantly illegal.
Now, today is the deadline for the US Justice Department to release all remaining files relating to Jeffrey Epstein in full. Yesterday, photos were released from the Epstein estate showing quotes from Lolita, a book about the grooming of a child, written on the bare skin of a woman. Also this week, Susie Wiles, the White House Chief of Staff, has been interviewed by Vanity Fair talking about Epstein and describing Donald Trump as having an alcoholic's personality. Well, let's discuss both of these stories with Gerard Baker, editor-at-large at the Wall Street Journal. Good afternoon, Gerard.
Hello, Kathy.
How big is this release going to be today? How significant, the release of the Epstein files?
I mean, the honest answer is we don't know because we don't know what's in there. My strong suspicion is that the law of diminishing returns with the Epstein files, the so-called Epstein files, really applies. Everybody keeps sort of eagerly anticipating the next release. Both sides, Democrats and Republicans, want to, a sort of warning that there are bombshells in there. And then it just turns out to be some other rather lurid and unpleasant pictures of men hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein. So I'm a little skeptical, frankly, that this is going to be any kind of a bombshell, anything dramatic. As I've said to you before and to others before, especially on the Donald Trump question, look, the Justice Department, the government, has had these files for years. Joe Biden, when he was president, his Justice Department had these files for years. The idea that there would be some unbelievably incriminating or damaging evidence relating to Donald Trump in those files, and that the Biden administration would have simply sat on them for 4 years, given everything else they did with Donald Trump and everything else they went after, is just utterly implausible. So, look, I don't want to kind of, A, I don't know. B, I don't want to sort of, I don't want to kind of be the party pooper here, but I'll be very surprised if there's anything in these files that tells us anything very dramatic or has any really significant effect on stuff we don't already know.
Well, let's turn now then to Susie Wiles' interview in Vanity Fair, which is really quite eye-popping. How damaging is that to Donald Trump?
I think there's been a lot of conversation, obviously, about that. And for your listeners who may not be aware of it, Susie Wiles, White House Chief of Staff, gave this not just one interview, by the way, but 11 interviews over the course of the year to a writer for Vanity Fair, someone who's written about chiefs of staff, and says some very, very blunt and rather disobliging things about members of the Trump team. Essentially says J.D. Vance, the vice president, is a kind of political, sort of says a bit of a political cynic.
And a conspiracy theorist.
Conspiracy theorist, exactly. She says very, very harsh words about Elon Musk. She has harsh words about Pam Bondi, the Attorney General. Look, and the sort of the view. Forgive me, I'm going to sound like a J.D. Vance style conspiracy theorist here. The popular view is that this is a gaffe. Why did she do it? She said these things. What was she thinking? Look, she sat down for 11 on-the-record interviews with this man. I think she knew exactly what she was doing. Susie Wiles is one of the most seasoned political operatives in America. I actually think, again, sorry to sort of indulge the conspiracy idea, I think she knew exactly what she was doing, and I think Donald Trump knew exactly what she was doing. I think Trump has always, one of the remarkable things about this first year of Donald Trump's second term is there's been very little of the kind of public backbiting that we saw in the first term. It's been a pretty disciplined ship, and one of the reasons it's been so disciplined apparently is because Susie Wiles is extraordinarily good at holding people, keeping people's mouths shut.
Yeah, but then if she knew what she was going to do, what she was doing, why did she do it? Because it is disobliging, to say the least, as you put it.
Because Donald Trump loves the idea of taking people down several pegs. Mm-hmm. He doesn't like the idea of people going around saying, "Oh, aren't they all wonderful?" He loves the idea. This is the whole kind of, remember The Apprentice? This is the way he kind of manages the whole thing. Like, create a competition among the people who. Him.
But I buy that.
Say negative things about people. Yeah, it's like but it doesn't hurt him at all.
Yeah, but she talked about him having an alcoholic's personality, so it's sort of.
Yeah, you're taking that. I mean, that context was. I mean, she made obviously he doesn't drink. We know that, and she made the point he doesn't drink. And the reason she said that whole context is he has a kind of addictive personality. And it was actually the context of the quote was a positive one. It was like he
Yeah,
really states on things and he really gets to grips with things. He's almost
yeah,
like kind of an alcoholic's personality. So
true.
that was actually out of context. But no, the negative stuff is about all these people around Trump, all of whom are kind of competing for his favor, many of whom are competing to succeed him. And so for him to have someone out there saying some negative things about this is classic Trump. This is the way, there's an element of pure cruelty about it. He likes to kind of spike people. And there's an element of, I don't want anybody getting too big for their boots. So
Yeah.
I'm quite happy to have my chief of staff go out there and say some fairly nasty things about some of these people.
Now, documents related to the paedophile Jeffrey Epstein will not be released in full before today's legal deadline. Several 100,000 files were expected to be made public in the coming hours, but US Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche says the need to protect victims means thousands more will only come out over the next few weeks. I'm now joined by Sarah Baxter, the director of the Marie Colvin Centre for International Reporting. Good evening, Sarah.
Hello, Kathy.
What was expected today and what's actually going to happen?
Well, by law, a law that Trump himself signed, absolutely all the Epstein files, anything relating to them held by the Department of Justice and the FBI, were due to be released today. And now it looks like they're not going to be. And that is actually blatantly illegal. And although Todd Blanche, Trump's lawyer, was talking about defending the victims and survivors of Epstein's sex trafficking behavior, the victims themselves want these files released and, in fact, say that there's up to 20 named individuals that were accused of sex crimes that the FBI knows about, and they want those names released. But we're not going to get the full files after all, and frankly, it's just part of a pattern of constantly slow-walking the release of anything to do with Jeffrey Epstein, which started at Trump's behest, really, back in February. At first, his Attorney General, Pam Bondi, was going to release the papers. She released stuff to MAGA conspiracy theorists that they'd all seen before. They got furious. And here we are months later, and still nobody's seeing the full files.
But that suggests that, I'm not saying you're a conspiracy theorist, but there's something to the conspiracy, or the idea at least, that there's information in these files that would be damaging to Donald Trump and his allies in the White House. But it might not be the case.
It might not. And in fact, plenty of damaging material about Donald Trump has already come out. I mean, he's already, pictures have emerged with him, posing with youngish women, I wouldn't say underage women. There's all sorts of things that he disputes, such as an alleged birthday congratulatory letter by him written to Jeffrey Epstein. He claims that's fake news. But, really, even his chief of staff, Susie Wiles, isn't denying that he was a sort of playboy friend of Trump back in the day. Luckily for Trump, and one should say this, is he broke off relations with Epstein before Epstein was charged with sex trafficking, which was by no means the case with so many people.
Yeah.
However,
well, just on that point, Donald Trump's line is that actually, people like Bill Clinton are in more trouble than he is over all this. Is there any credence to that?
well, I don't know. I can only take Susie Wiles' word for it in the Vanity Fair interview that there is nothing criminal associated with Bill Clinton in those files. But honestly, we don't know. That's the point. And of course, under Trump, the Justice Department has been pretty weaponized to go after former enemies. Again, Susie Wiles, in a very candid interview with Vanity Fair, admitted that some of the legal action against Trump's foes could look like retribution. So why all the coyness over the Jeffrey Epstein details? And that's why people think there's a cover-up, even if they're not conspiracists.
Yeah, and there are some every day brings some new revelation, doesn't it? That is very embarrassing, if not to Trump, then to other people.
Well, that's right. And it's been taking in, left-wing gurus like Noam Chomsky, filmmaker Woody Allen, Bill Clinton, we've already mentioned. But of course, Donald Trump's name is said to appear 1,500 times in those files.
Yeah.
And certainly there are a lot of, already we've seen a lot of pictures of him there. So So, I mean, there's plenty of mud to fling around. Steve Bannon, one of Donald Trump's chief strategists in his first term and still a very influential podcaster, he's in pictures with Epstein. In fact, they've got a selfie of each other taken in front of a mirror. And I mean, there's so much there. I mean, actually, Bannon came up with the phrase about flooding the zone with an unmentionable word to such an extent that people get kind of bamboozled by it. And frankly, Kathy, there's so much stuff in there. It's really quite hard to process already.
Yeah. Well, just finally then, perhaps the truth is that the most threatening thing for Donald Trump is actually on the American economy, cost of living and so on. This Epstein stuff could end up being a red herring. I take your point, we don't know what's in there yet, but actually what counts is how people are feeling in their pockets.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. But here's the thing. I think the dent to Donald Trump's credibility set in over the Epstein files, which he called a hoax. And he's since been calling the affordability crisis in America a hoax, denying the evidence of people's own eyes and experience. And I think that the break with some of his supporters in MAGA over Epstein has led to that sort of slow deterioration in his credibility to the point that his approval ratings dipped below 40% and started hovering at 38, 39.
Very
now,
interesting.
The inflation figures were good in November, or relatively so, 2.7%. If the economy improves in 2026, all will be forgiven. But
very interesting. So anything he calls a hoax is basically trouble for him, potentially.
Yeah, you've got
the rule of thumb. Sarah Baxter, thank you very much for joining us, the director of the Marie Colvin Centre for International Reporting there.